Ever get one of those phone calls, the kind that just comes out of the blue and completely throws your plans out the window?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Life's full of surprises, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those unexpected twists and turns that force you to reassess everything.
Well, that's exactly how our deep dive begins today. Picture this. Late November 2016, a quiet town nestled along the Columbia River in Washington state.
Peaceful, scenic, probably not expecting a whole lot of drama.
Exactly. But then a phone rings, and on the other end of the line, it's none other than Vice President-elect Pence.
Okay, now things are getting interesting. What's Vice President-elect Pence doing, calling some random person in a small town?
Well, this wasn't just any random person. This was someone with no prior involvement in the presidential campaign, someone who'd never even met Mr. Trump before.
Intriguing. Sounds like we're dealing with someone with a pretty impressive background, even if they weren't on the political radar.
You're absolutely right, and the reason for the call. To ask this individual if they'd be interested in meeting with President-elect Trump about becoming the next Secretary of Defense.
Wow, talk about an unexpected opportunity. That's a huge leap from a quiet life on the Columbia River to potentially leading the entire U.S. military.
A total whirlwind. But right from the start, there was a major hurdle standing in the way.
Oh, right. There's that pesky federal law that prevents former military officers from serving as Secretary of Defense within 7 years of leaving active duty.
Exactly. And the only exception to that rule, as you might recall, was General George Marshall back in 1950.
A pretty significant precedent to try and follow. So where did our subject stand in terms of that 7-year rule?
Well, he'd only been out of the service for about 3.5 years.
Okay, so not quite clear of that legal restriction. That's a pretty big question mark hanging over everything right from the get-go.
Absolutely. But despite that legal uncertainty, the meeting went ahead as planned.
So where did this crucial meeting take place? The White House, the Pentagon, some high-security government facility?
Not quite. We're talking Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey.
Interesting. Not exactly the image that comes to mind when you think about high-level national security discussions.
And apparently it wasn't some grand, opulent boardroom either. Just a fairly modest conference room.
Huh. Keeping it low-key. So who was present for this meeting besides our mystery guest and the president-elect?
Well, Vice President-elect Pence was there, of course, as was the incoming chief of staff, basically the whole core transition team.
Quite the audience. So how did the conversation go? Did President-elect Trump dominate the discussion, or was it more of a back-and-forth exchange?
From what we gather, it was a very wide-ranging discussion, led primarily by Mr. Trump himself, covering everything from the overall state of the military to specific policy areas.
And did they see eye to eye on everything, or were there some points of disagreement?
Interestingly, both. There were areas of clear alignment, but also some topics where they held differing views. But the overall tone of the meeting was described as surprisingly amiable.
Now, that's really fascinating, considering the often stark differences in their public statements at the time. The source material hints at potential disagreements over issues like NATO and the use of torture.
Exactly. You've really hit on one of the most intriguing aspects of this whole encounter.
So, walk me through what happened after this meeting. Was our subject offered the job on the spot, or did things unfold more gradually?
Well, walking out of that meeting, our subject fully expected to return to his life as a researcher and lecturer at Stanford's Hoover Institution.
Makes sense. Sounds like a pretty fulfilling and intellectually stimulating way to spend your time after decades of military service.
Absolutely. But then came the next big surprise.
Ooh, another unexpected turn of events.
You could say that. Imagine this. They're walking out the front steps of this grand, colonnaded clubhouse, right into a throng of waiting press.
Ah, the ever-present media. Always ready to capture those key moments.
And standing right there, next to our subject, the president-elect publicly declares him to be, quote, the real deal.
Wow, talk about a public endorsement. That's not exactly subtle.
Not at all. And just days later, the formal nomination for Secretary of Defense comes through.
So, from a quiet academic life back to the very heart of Washington, D.C., that Stanford gig was probably looking a lot less certain at that point.
You're telling me that return to Stanford became entirely contingent on getting a congressional waiver for that 7-year rule and, of course, Senate confirmation.
What a wild ride. But what really stands out to me in all of this is the individual's core ethos, the guiding principle that really shines through. It's that idea that politics ends at the water's edge.
Politics ends at the water's edge. What a powerful statement. It really speaks to a deep commitment to serving the country, regardless of which political party is in power.
Exactly. And let's be clear. He was enjoying his post-military life. He had time with family, intellectual pursuits, a comfortable routine.
Hard to walk away from that.
Exactly. But that sense of duty, that commitment to serving a cause greater than himself, clearly outweighed any personal considerations.
And it's not like he was walking into this role completely blind. He had a deep understanding of how the Pentagon worked, of the complexities of national security policy.
Oh, right. He had served as executive secretary to two different secretaries of defense, William Perry and William Cohen, back in the late 90s.
Exactly. And he'd also been a senior military assistant to a deputy secretary. He'd seen firsthand the inner workings of that massive bureaucratic machine.
That kind of firsthand experience is invaluable. It's one thing to read about strategy and policy in textbooks, but actually being in those rooms, witnessing the decision-making process firsthand, that gives you a whole different level of understanding.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the heart of our deep dive today, a book he authored where he shares the lessons he learned over his long and incredibly diverse career.
A career spanning 4 decades, encompassing everything from leading troops in combat to navigating the highest levels of government. That's a wealth of experience to draw on.
Absolutely. And he wrote this book specifically for both military and civilian audiences, framing it as a way of giving back to the American people who essentially funded his 40 years of service.
A nice way to think about it, a return on investment for the American taxpayer.
Yeah.
What kind of lessons are we talking about here? Is it a tactical manual, a leadership guide, a memoir?
It's a blend of all those things.
Right.
But what's really important for you, the listener, is that he deliberately avoids getting bogged down in contemporary political arguments.
Steering clear of those partisan talking points. That's refreshing.
Exactly. The focus is on timeless principles. Principles that prepare you for those unexpected challenges, for dealing with the complexities of leadership, and for maintaining public trust.
That focus on enduring principles rather than short-term political expediency is what makes this so valuable. These are lessons that resonate across time and situations.
Exactly. And to really grasp the foundation of these lessons, the book takes us all the way back to some of his earliest, most formative experiences.
Okay, like what kind of experiences shaped his worldview and his approach to leadership?
Well, there's this one story from 1971 about a near-fatal fall he had when working on a dam project in eastern Washington. Picture this. He's up on this steep ridge, looking down at the workers below, and then suddenly,
Uh-oh. I'm sensing trouble.
he loses his footing on the ice and starts sliding down towards the Columbia River.
A sheer drop, I'm assuming. Not a situation you want to be in.
Absolutely not. And he tries desperately to stop himself. He digs in his heels, even tries using his kabar knife to get some purchase.
Talk about a moment of sheer terror.
But nothing works. He's completely powerless to stop his slide.
That must have been a truly humbling experience.
Absolutely. And the chilling realization that hits him is that despite all his efforts, some circumstances are simply beyond your control. It's a stark lesson in the limits of individual agency.
It makes you rethink your assumptions about control. You can prepare, you can plan, but sometimes life throws you a curveball that you just can't anticipate or fully control.
Exactly. And that experience early on really shaped his understanding of risk and the importance of being prepared for those unforeseen events.
Makes sense. If you've stared down a situation like that where you're literally sliding towards potential disaster, it changes how you approach everything else.
Exactly. And then there's this story from his younger days in Montana about getting into a bit of a scrape with 3 local boys.
Youthful indiscretions. We've all been there.
Well, in this case, it was more of a one-sided beatdown.
Not exactly a fair fight, then.
Not at all. But what's funny is that a sheriff, complete with the white cowboy hat and everything, shows up.
Sounds like something out of a movie.
Totally. He throws our subject in jail, and then, to really teach him a lesson, puts him on a freight train heading out of town.
What a character. Did he offer any parting words of wisdom?
He did. He looked at our subject and said, 3 against 1. Tough to win against those odds.
Classic. A blunt but valuable lesson in assessing your situation realistically.
Exactly. And then there was his time at Central Washington State College where, by his own admission, he was a pretty mediocre student.
We can't all be straight-A students. Sometimes those early academic struggles teach you more than success ever could.
Absolutely. But taken together, these early experiences really highlight the importance of realistically evaluating your odds, of understanding the challenges you face before diving headfirst into any endeavor.
Essential lessons for anyone, really.
Yeah.
Whether you're facing a physical confrontation, an academic challenge, or a complex project at work, knowing your limitations and the potential obstacles is crucial.
Absolutely. So fast forward a bit, he enlists in the Marines and finds himself stationed in Okinawa with the 2nd Battalion, 4th Marine Regiment.
The Marines, known for their rigorous training and their intense focus on unit cohesion.
Exactly. And he really credits the experienced leaders in that unit, many of whom were combat veterans, for being so willing to share their hard-won knowledge. He emphasizes that their support was immediate. Mine to lose, not to gain, as he puts it.
That's a really interesting way to frame it. It suggests that there was an expectation of competence from the start, but also a strong support system in place to help you succeed.
Exactly. And there was this huge emphasis on building a strong professional reputation, on being both physically and mentally tough, tactically sound, knowing your artillery, being adaptable, having a responsive platoon.
Sounds like a pretty demanding environment, no room for slackers.
Not at all. And above all else, you had to lead by example. You couldn't ask your troops to do anything you weren't willing to do yourself.
It's that whole walk the walk philosophy. You can't just talk a good game. You have to embody the values and standards you expect from your team.
Precisely. And on that note, there's this unforgettable piece of advice he got from a Corporal Johnson. Johnson told him, "Lieutenant, you have to be harder than petrified woodpecker's lips."
Harder than petrified woodpecker's lips.
Right.
Now that's an image. What was the context for that bit of wisdom?
Well, Johnson was basically telling him that some of the guys in the platoon weren't cutting it, weren't meeting Marine standards. And to effectively lead, he needed to embody that ultimate toughness, that unwavering resolve.
So it wasn't just about physical strength, but a kind of mental and emotional resilience, an ability to make tough decisions and hold people accountable.
Precisely. And he then recounts this incident in the jungle where one of his Marines, clearly disgruntled, starts muttering threats.
Uh-oh. Sounds like a volatile situation. How did he handle that?
Well, instead of reacting impulsively, which could have fractured the trust within the platoon, he calmly ordered the Marine to follow him back to the command post.
So he de-escalated the situation without backing down. A calculated move.
Exactly. He was essentially calling the Marines' bluff, but doing it in a way that maintained order and didn't undermine the unit's cohesion.
It's a great example of how true leadership isn't about brute force or aggression, but about making those carefully considered decisions that uphold the integrity of the team.
Absolutely. And he then goes on to explain the expeditious discharge policy that was in effect during those more turbulent times. It was basically a tool to maintain those high standards within the Corps to quickly weed out those who weren't meeting the mark.
Sounds like a pretty controversial policy. What was the rationale behind it?
Well, he credits those seasoned first sergeants and future commandants for effectively using this policy to get rid of what he calls bottom feeders. And he emphasizes that the underlying reasons why this policy worked, why it was effective in maintaining those standards, were actually tied to basic human needs.
Basic human needs. How so?
Think about it. We all have this deep desire for belonging, for a sense of purpose, for being part of something larger than ourselves. And just as importantly, we have this inherent aversion to public rejection.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Nobody wants to be singled out, to be the one who fails to meet the standard.
Exactly. And that's what made this policy so effective. It tapped into those core human motivations, that desire to belong and to avoid being ostracized.
So it wasn't just about punishment, but about appealing to those deep-seated desires within us. Fascinating.
Absolutely. And he then recounts learning about different fighting styles, different approaches to combat from the Vietnam veterans in his unit.
The Vietnam War. That was a conflict that really challenged conventional military thinking.
Yeah.
What kind of lessons did he learn from those veterans?
One of the most impactful was the concept of fire sacks. Essentially, these were pre-registered critical terrain areas where they could just unleash overwhelming firepower on the enemy if they got too close.
So it was a kind of pre-planned defensive strategy designed to maximize their firepower in a close-quarters situation.
Exactly. And the reason this was so effective was because the enemy's proximity actually prevented the use of more indirect fire support. They couldn't risk hitting their own troops.
So they turned the enemy's tactic against them, using their close proximity as an opportunity to unleash a devastating response.
Precisely. It's a stark lesson in how tactics and strategies evolve in direct response to the harsh realities of combat.
It also highlights the importance of being adaptable, of thinking outside the box when the situation demands it.
Absolutely. And then there's this really impactful mentoring experience he had with his company commander, Andy Finlayson.
Mentorship, that one-on-one guidance from someone more experienced can be absolutely crucial in any profession.
Absolutely. And this particular mentorship was focused on the critical skill of fire support. During a live fire exercise in the Philippines, Finlayson personally guided him on how to bring artillery strikes progressively closer and closer to their own position.
Wow, that's a huge display of trust to have someone walking you through something like that. One wrong move and
It could have been disastrous, but Finlayson had that level of confidence in him, and that trust really built a strong bond between them.
and what did he do in return for this mentorship?
Well, he diligently read all the books Finlayson recommended, classic military texts like Lee's Lieutenants and Liddell Hart's Strategy.
The classics, always valuable to revisit those foundational works.
Exactly. And this experience, this reciprocal exchange of knowledge and trust, really shaped his approach to mentorship throughout his own career.
It's a beautiful example of how mentorship works best when it's a two-way street, a mutual exchange of knowledge and respect.
Absolutely. And this hands-on experience with fire support really solidified in him the importance of effectively employing supporting arms, of using firepower to achieve objectives without unnecessarily risking the lives of his infantry.
That's a core principle of military leadership, isn't it? To use all available resources effectively and to minimize casualties whenever possible.
Exactly. And he directly links this to the confidence of junior officers and the unwavering commitment of the troops they lead. If the troops have absolute faith that their leaders are competent and won't needlessly endanger them.
They're far more likely to follow them anywhere, to give their all, even in the face of danger.
Precisely. And he then goes on to really break down the essence of battles, the core principles that determine success or failure.
Okay, so what's the secret sauce? What are those essential elements?
In his view, it boils down to two things: achieving fire superiority and skillfully maneuvering your forces.
Fire superiority and maneuver, the classic principles of warfare going back centuries.
Exactly. And he firmly believes that the fundamental purpose of the Marine Corps is to win battles decisively and to forge Marines who embody the Corps' core values. Anything that doesn't directly contribute to those two aims is, by definition, secondary.
A very clear and focused mission statement. No room for distractions or unnecessary complexities.
Absolutely. And he emphasizes the potentially tragic consequences of failing to master the basics, the importance of crystal clear orders, relentless rehearsals, accurate intelligence, and repetitive ingrained training.
It's about honing those fundamental skills to the point where they become second nature, where you can execute them under pressure without hesitation.
Exactly. And he offers some interesting advice for those studying military history. While reading broadly is valuable, he suggests deeply studying a select few battles to truly understand the mistakes and successes of others.
A deep dive versus a broad survey, focusing on the nuances and the details to really extract those valuable lessons.
Precisely. And then he introduces this concept that goes beyond mere physical courage. He calls it conviction.
Conviction. It's about more than just bravery, isn't it? It suggests a deep-seated belief in something, a willingness to stand up for what you think is right.
Exactly. And for him, it's about your peers and, most importantly, your troops knowing without a shadow of a doubt what you stand for and what you will absolutely not tolerate.
So it's about setting clear boundaries, having those non-negotiable principles that guide your actions and decisions.
Absolutely. He talks about the importance of clearly stating your flat-ass rules and then consistently sticking to them.
No wavering, no exceptions. It's about being that unwavering presence, that rock that people can rely on.
Exactly. But he also emphasizes that this firmness needs to be balanced with personal humility and genuine compassion. You can be tough and demanding without being a tyrant.
It's a delicate balance, isn't it? To be both strong and empathetic.
It is. And his ultimate leadership insight is this: an officer, or really any leader, only needs to win one truly vital battle.
Oh, and what battle is that?
The battle for the hearts and minds of their people.
That's a powerful idea. It's not about conquering territory or defeating enemies, but about winning the trust and loyalty of those you lead.
Exactly. And he goes on to explain how competence, Genuine caring for your people and that unwavering conviction together forge an unshakable fighting spirit.
That's a recipe for success, isn't it? Competence, caring, and conviction. Those are the ingredients that build a team that can overcome any obstacle.
Absolutely. And he defines true leadership as the ability to reach the very souls of your team, to instill in them that unbreakable commitment, even when facing the most extreme challenges.
It's about inspiring people, about connecting with them on a deep emotional level. It's about more than just issuing orders. It's about igniting that fire within them.
Precisely. And drawing on his years of experience commanding small units, he came to understand the core expectations within the Marine Corps. You're dealing with highly motivated, mission-oriented individuals.
People who thrive on challenge, who want to be given responsibility and the freedom to execute.
Exactly. They need clear tasks, the autonomy to figure out the best way to accomplish those tasks, and the understanding that they'll be held accountable for the results.
It's about empowerment, isn't it? Giving people ownership over their work and trusting them to deliver.
Absolutely. And he uses a very specific example to illustrate the importance of individual evaluation. He talks about having to write 76 meticulous fit traps or fitness reports for his recruiters.
Fitness reports, those are essentially performance evaluations, right? The kind of thing that could make or break a career.
Exactly. And instead of taking the easy route, using generic templates, he insisted on crafting personalized reports for each Marine.
Wow, 76 individualized reports. That's a serious commitment to detail.
It was. He described sitting down with his officers, armed with a thesaurus and copious amounts of caffeine, to really capture the essence of each Marine's performance.
Talk about going the extra mile. Why was he so insistent on this level of detail?
Because he believed that accurate and personalized evaluations were absolutely crucial for maintaining high morale and for promoting those who truly deserved it.
It's about fairness, isn't it?
Yeah.
Making sure that people are recognized for their individual contributions and that promotions are based on merit.
Exactly. And he directly linked this to the ethical imperative of recruiting high-quality individuals and promoting those who consistently gave their best. He wanted to build a culture of excellence.
A culture where people are motivated to excel, not just for personal gain, but because they believe in the mission and the values of the organization.
Precisely. And the key to achieving that was holding everyone to the same high standard, while also offering support to those who might be struggling. It was about demanding excellence while also fostering a culture of mentorship and camaraderie.
It's about pushing people to reach their full potential, while also recognizing that everyone needs a helping hand sometimes. It's about balancing those two things.
Exactly. And the success of that recruiting station speaks for itself. They exceeded their targets, and perhaps more importantly, the recruiters themselves developed valuable skills in persuasion and communication.
So it wasn't just about hitting those recruitment numbers, but about developing people, about preparing them for future leadership roles.
Absolutely. And then he takes command of an understrength battalion in 29 Palms, California.
Understrength. That sounds like a challenge right from the start. Not exactly ideal conditions for a new commander.
Not at all. They were significantly short on personnel, well below their authorized strength.
So how did he approach that challenge? Did he focus on trying to get more recruits, or was there a different strategy at play?
Well, he made a very deliberate decision to focus on the Marines he already had, to invest in their training and development.
Okay, so it was about making the most of the resources he had available, about maximizing the potential of his existing team.
Exactly. He drew on a lesson he'd learned as a young second lieutenant. Instead of dwelling on the limitations, he focused on building a strong, highly capable cadre who could then effectively train future recruits.
It's a great example of turning a potential weakness into a strength. By investing in the training of his existing Marines, he was essentially creating a force multiplier for future growth.
Precisely. And this period of focused training was then abruptly interrupted by a call from Colonel Fulford.
Uh-oh. I have a feeling this isn't a social call.
It wasn't. Fulford told him, "We're going to war." He needed his entire battalion back from a 50-mile trek immediately, with an advance party ready to deploy by the next morning.
Wow, talk about a sudden shift in priorities. From peacetime training to combat deployment in the blink of an eye.
Exactly. And it really highlights that unpredictable nature of military service. You can be meticulously planning and preparing for one thing, and then suddenly, everything changes.
It's about being adaptable, being able to shift gears quickly and effectively in response to unforeseen events.
Absolutely. And he then describes how he adapted that classic Roman legion formation, the rectangular camp, into a more strategically oriented triangular logger.
The logger. a defensive formation designed to maximize situational awareness and provide protection from all sides.
Exactly. And this particular logger was positioned to face north towards the anticipated enemy. Every single member of the battalion knew precisely where the key elements were located: the mortar pits, the communications hubs, the fuel supplies, the command posts.
So it was about maximizing efficiency, ensuring that everyone knew their role and could quickly get into position if needed.
Absolutely. And given the limitations of night vision technology and GPS at the time, they placed a heavy emphasis on basic compass navigation. They practiced moving at night, navigating by the stars, and were constantly reminded of the impending conflict by frequent, low-altitude flyovers by Marine jets.
Wow, talk about immersive training. They were really trying to create as realistic a scenario as possible.
Exactly. They slept on the ground, engaged in nightly tactical discussions using nothing more than rocks to simulate unit movements, and diligently read books on desert warfare to image chaos, as he puts it.
Image chaos. I like that. It's about mentally preparing yourself for the unpredictable, for those moments when everything goes sideways.
Precisely. And then a moment of sobering reality. A direct message from Colonel Fulford arrives, delivering the stark news about the potential for massive casualties in the anticipated Iraqi minefields.
Oh, no. That's the harsh truth of war, isn't it? The ever-present risk of death or serious injury. What did the message say?
It was blunt. Nearly half killed and wounded was the estimate.
A chilling prediction. Did they have a plan to deal with this minefield threat?
They did, but it was quickly deemed woefully inadequate. Their existing fire support plan, an inverted U-shape, wouldn't provide enough coverage to ensure the safety of the troops.
So what did they do? Did they try to modify the existing plan, or was a more drastic solution needed?
On Christmas Day, he got on the phone with his fire support team and issued a very clear and uncompromising demand. Start over.
Start over. Scrap the entire plan and go back to the drawing board.
Exactly. He wanted absolute certainty that everything within that U-shaped area would be neutralized, that nothing would be left to chance.
It's about taking every possible precaution to minimize risk, especially when you're facing a threat as deadly as a minefield.
Absolutely. And this intense period of preparation leading up to the actual combat operations is what he describes as psychological tuning.
Psychological tuning. That sounds interesting. What does that entail?
It's about going beyond the physical training, the drills, the tactical maneuvers. It's about preparing the minds of the troops for the extreme intensity of combat, for the chaos and the uncertainty that they'll inevitably face.
So it's about mental resilience, about building that inner strength to withstand the pressures of combat.
Exactly. It involved hard and varied training designed to eliminate complacency, to build those deeply ingrained muscle memories that kick in when the adrenaline's pumping.
It's about training to the point where your actions become almost automatic, where you can react effectively even when you're under immense stress.
Precisely. And it also involved fostering strong unit cohesion, that deep trust between comrades that allows them to function as a single cohesive unit.
That sense of camaraderie, that shared purpose, is absolutely crucial in combat. It's what keeps people going when things get tough.
Absolutely. And finally, it involved constant rehearsal, going over those battle drills again and again, even during brief pauses in the overall operational tempo.
It's about maintaining that edge, that constant state of readiness.
Exactly. And he then references a powerful quote from George Washington: "To be prepared for war is one of the most effectual means of preserving peace."
A timeless truth, isn't it?
Yeah.
The best way to avoid conflict is to be fully prepared for it.
Absolutely. And for those under his command who lacked actual combat experience, the key to this preparation was imaging, a deliberate and intensive process of mental rehearsal.
So it was about visualizing those combat scenarios, about mentally walking through those potential situations before they actually encountered them.
Precisely. He wanted every single Marine under his command to have mentally and physically fought through those potential scenarios a dozen times before ever setting foot on the battlefield.
That's a powerful technique. By repeatedly visualizing those high-pressure situations, you can reduce the shock and disorientation of actually experiencing them.
Exactly. And he then describes the specific types of mental imagery they focused on: the overwhelming chaos and explosions, the rapid and often shouted orders, the deafening cacophony of battle.
It's about preparing for sensory overload, for the sheer intensity of the combat environment.
Precisely. and the absolute necessity of deeply ingrained muscle memory to enable swift and decisive actions, even when you have incomplete information.
It's about training to the point where you can react instinctively, even when you don't have all the answers.
Exactly, and he uses a compelling analogy. Think of a baseball hitter instantly gauging a curveball and reacting accordingly.
That split-second decision, where there's no time for conscious thought. It has to be pure instinct, honed through countless repetitions.
Exactly, and the same principle applies to a Marine in the life-or-death intensity of close combat. Those reactions have to be automatic, ingrained to the point where they happen without conscious thought.
It's the difference between surviving and not surviving in those critical moments.
Precisely. Now, let's shift gears a bit and consider the period immediately following the Gulf War. There was this widespread feeling of what some called the end of history.
The end of history. A pretty bold claim. What did people mean by that?
Well, the dramatic fall of the Warsaw Pact and the Soviet Union, the seeming triumph of liberal democracy over communism, led many to believe that large-scale conflicts between major world powers were a thing of the past.
It was a time of great optimism, a sense that we'd entered a new era of peace and stability.
Exactly. But as we know, history had other plans.
Oh, absolutely. Those optimistic predictions of the end of history proved to be tragically premature.
They did. But at the time, this sentiment had a profound impact on the U.S. military. The absence of any immediately looming major wars led to intense pressure for a so-called peace dividend.
The peace dividend. The idea that with the Cold War over, we could finally start redirecting those massive military expenditures towards domestic programs.
Exactly. And that led to some pretty severe cuts to the Pentagon budget. Our subject found himself assigned to Headquarters Marine Corps in the Pentagon during this period.
So he went from leading troops in the field to working in the heart of the military bureaucracy. Quite a change of pace.
It was, and his responsibilities were focused on job assignments and enlisted Marine retention during a period of rapid and significant force reduction.
Aha, the drawdown. Not an easy task. You're essentially having to tell dedicated, highly trained Marines that their services are no longer needed.
Exactly. It was a very difficult and often heartbreaking task, having to force many talented Marines into early retirement or separation from service.
And there's that added layer of irony, knowing that just a few years later, after 9/11, many of those very Marines would be desperately needed.
Absolutely. It's a stark reminder of the unintended consequences of decisions made based on what we think we know about the future.
Predictions are always risky, especially when it comes to geopolitics.
They are. And he then emphasizes the importance of continuous learning throughout your career, highlighting his own decision to attend the National War College at the age of 43.
The National War College. That's the pinnacle of professional military education, isn't it?
It is, and he points out that the military, unlike many civilian professions, operates as a closed labor system. It takes direct responsibility for the education and development of its leaders throughout their careers.
It's a fascinating model, investing in the continuous growth of its personnel.
It is. And after his time at the War College, he took command of the 7th Marines in the Mojave Desert, leading over 6,000 Marines and sailors.
Wow, that's a significant jump in responsibility, commanding an entire regiment. What were some of the key challenges he faced in this new role?
Well, it was a real shift in leadership style. He went from directly leading small units to leading through his subordinate